And I'm down in, and I'm reaching into a 45-gallon drum, pulling out with a bait hook a big slimy chunk of seal meat.
Some rotten seal meat.
And I forgot to close the door.
Oh no!
So I hear this, Gord. And I turn around, and there's a bear inside the cage with me. And the cage is
in the cage with you.
Inside the cage with me. And sure, I've got a handgun on and stuff like that. And I thought, this is bad. This is really bad.
Welcome to the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast.
This is another episode of the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast. I am George, co-host Scott Sunderwald here.
Hey, good to be here.
Scott's been on top of the world about this guest we got lined up.
Yeah, my celebrity crush is here, right?
Scott, you might as well do the intro there.
Oh, I'm definitely doing the intro, yeah. So I know I've been bugging George for a year. We need to get you on here, Gord, so we're really honored you're here. If biologists could be celebrities, we've got them in the room. I'm really pleased we get to chat with you tonight. So Gord is a semi-retired research scientist. I don't think he's put his feet up yet. He's a former leader of the Foothills Research Institute Grizzly Bear Research Program in Hinton, Alberta. The program began in 1998. It ran for 23 years with over 250 published scientific papers from the research team, which is amazing. The program helped support 64 graduate students from 6 different Canadian universities, gathered $24 million from a variety of sources of support. Gordon was on secondment from the government for 23 years while running the Foothills Research Institute Grizzly Program, and was also an adjunct professor at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan. I did not know that fact. That's a new one for me. He's also the past chairman of the Alberta Grizzly Bear Recovery Team and is currently an executive council member with the International Association for Bear Research and Management. We'll chat about that tonight because, of course, there's brown bears in other parts of the world, and I know you've rubbed shoulders with some of those folks. Gordon has studied both polar bears and grizzly bears for 39 years, more than half of his life. Now he works as a private consultant on bear projects in a variety of locations in Canada. So he's the guy, and I was thinking, driving here, George, a lot of people call me up for facts on bears, and I just no, the guy's in the room.
Here's Gord's number.
the Pope is here. So no, we're really pleased you're here, Gordon. I've got some technical questions we might hit you with and stuff, but we're mostly glad to hear your story and to dig into some of your adventures. And I mean, I'm sure you've got enough for 2 lifetimes.
Oh, sure. And it's great to be chatting with you guys tonight. And that long introduction makes me feel really old. And if anyone is trying to figure out how old, more than half his life, 39 years, don't do that. Yeah. It's old. So I have been working on bears a really long time. And I thought I'd tell you how I started my interest in bears. So back in the day, I was this very young graduate student. I went up to Churchill, Manitoba, and I was studying Canada geese.
Okay.
And of course, I was the kind of guy that liked to be on my own, and the Arctic and wilderness was my thing. So I was out on the shores of Hudson Bay in the spring watching Arctic geese nest, and I was sitting with my spotting scope watching this female incubator eggs, which is really boring if you want to do that. And I'm looking through my spotting scope, and all of a sudden it just goes white. And I thought, what the heck? And I stand up. And there's a polar bear between me and the goose nest, which isn't that far away. And the bear stands up on his back legs, looks at me, and I back up. And I think I had an old British .303 Enfield rifle that I didn't want to use, and I didn't. And the bear just walked away, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I have to study bears.
Wow.
And that's where it started. And then I got lucky in my career. I managed to get a job after graduating up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. And I went around doing polar bear work throughout the Arctic, and one of my first jobs was to study bear deterrence, ways to keep bears and people apart and both alive and safe.
And you had to test them out?
Well, yeah. So you always go, if you're doing bear research, you have to go where all the bears are. So the big place is Churchill, where each fall bears congregate on the place called Cape Churchill, and I'd go there. I went there for 4 years in a row and spent 3 months, and I was living, me and an assistant, we lived in a fire tower. It's an old fire tower, and it's basically a box. Like think of an 8x8 box.
With two people.
Two people for 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And they would rotate the technician through who's helping me.
Yeah.
But I had to stay.
Okay.
So, and then I realized that I spent a year of my life, if I add up those 4 years, 3 months, a year of my life watching polar bears. But, I tested rubber bullets and all the stuff that people just take for granted now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was doing the early work on that stuff. It was,
Wow.
It's quite different than what it is today. But yeah, that's kind of where the polar bear stuff started. And then I went around doing stuff Baffin Island and the high Arctic, doing sort of monitoring and population catching and tagging bears to estimate populations. But yeah, I went around, worked with lots of different biologists, and learned a lot, and saw most of the Arctic, did some work in Alaska, and so it was a great northern career.
Man, that's amazing.
Yeah, not a boring life. My goodness.
What's the before we even started recording, you said you're doing some more stuff with polar bears again. Like now. Yeah,
and so it's interesting, how life is a circle.
Yeah.
So I got contacted by an organization that wanted me to test all the rubber bullets that are being used today, and because more and more polar bears are coming into coastal communities, and a lot of places along James Bay where they don't usually see polar bears coming in, but because of changing sea ice conditions and climate, there's bears showing up, and they don't know what to do. So people are handing out rubber bullets, which is they're really not rubber. Often they're a combination of plastic. But no one has gone and done any testing, or prior to this, with cold weather. So it's one thing, when they're in your truck and it's warm and you're using these things, but now be out on a skidoo or something and these things are 40 below. Does that little piece of rubber turn into a lead projectile?
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of work on that, and then I was doing some training with some guys, showing them how to keep bears away, and
So maybe before we move off the rubber bullets, I'm so curious, because I have a lot of experience with bear deterrents, or some, I should say. Tell us about the rubber bullets. What did you find from that research?
This is the seamy underbelly of science, right? Here you go. So I was testing something called rubber batons, and they were what was being used in Northern Ireland. When they were having, the troubles, and as they refer to it, in Northern Ireland. So these things are 38 millimeters. So think of like 1.5 inches by about 6 inches long.
Yeah.
And they're just a solid wad of rubber, and they were designed to be shot at the cobblestones to ricochet in front of onrushing protesters.
Gotcha.
They were never designed for shooting at a target, right?
Yeah.
And of course, many people have been killed in riot situations with those things.
I can imagine.
So I did these tests with polar bears, and can you imagine going into a government office in a purchasing department, say, okay, I need 4,000 rounds of rubber bullets, and I need two riot guns, and I did some stun grenade tests, and I did all sorts of stuff. But the guy was just giggling, saying, "Really?" And the amazing thing is, I got them. They showed up.
Yeah,
like that probably couldn't happen today. But so I did that, and they worked. They could keep bears away, and I tested. I thought, okay, how am I going to test to see if I can keep a polar bear away? Because they're just kind of wandering around, passing through. So I hired some guys up up the coast from Churchill, and they caught seals and they skinned them. And so I got these 45-gallon drums full of like rotting seal carcasses.
Oh, okay.
So I took them out and I chained them up, So I'll tell you the full story was, the bears, first thing I thought, okay, I'll put out some bait. And the bears kind of chin up, and they come running and grab the bait, and then they take off. And I thought, well, that's no good. I can't. So I had to chain them up. And then, of course, I'm testing rubber bullets, and I thought, well, no one knew if the bear, if it was hit, if it was going to charge.
Yeah.
If it would attack.
Yeah,
right?
you just annoyed it.
Yeah.
So I built a shark cage.
Oh, jeez.
Out in the tundra, and I fly in with this twin otter with all these pieces, and there's 200 pieces of steel I'm bolting together, and I had to store all my bait inside because the bears would get it.
Yeah.
And of course, I said to the management people, I said, okay, after I test 100 bears, then I'll test outside the cage.
Yeah.
And of course, I was young and naive. I said, well, 20's good.
Yeah.
So after 20, I was just outside the cage shooting at these bears. They'd come into the bait, but they would watch you. They knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And bears quickly learned things like how far they could get away from the bait before I would shoot at them.
Okay.
And they would also learn that biologists have to sleep at night, right?
Right.
So they would wait till, it's
Yeah.
getting dark, and I'd climb back up the ladder to,
Yeah.
have dinner and go to sleep. And then they'd come in and they'd clean up everything. And they knew the next day when I'd come down to get back in the cage that, hey, we're going to start again. And they'd move away, right?
Did they ever approach the shark cage? Like, were you
Well,
ever,
you think of working on bears, you can become complacent. You should never be like that, but it happens, right? So I remember one day, so think of it, I've got my partner up top in the tower. He's making observations of the distance and speed, all the sciencey stuff. And I'm down in, and I'm reaching into a 45-gallon drum, pulling out with a bait hook a big slimy chunk of seal meat.
Some rotten seal meat.
And I forgot to close the door.
Oh, no.
So I hear this, Gord. And I turn around, and there's a bear inside the cage with me. And the cage is
in the cage with you.
inside the cage with me. And sure, I've got a handgun on and stuff like that. And I thought, this is bad. This is really bad. So I just dropped the seal right in front of him, literally 2 feet. Dropped it, and the bear looked at me, took the bait, and just left.
Wow.
So you don't do that. Things not to do in your life. So
Oh, man.
so that, so the moral of this is, so I do all this tests. We learned that rubber bullets can work. And then I said, okay, we need a product now that you don't need a riot gun. These shells are too expensive. They're too big. And we need a smaller product that could be used out of a 12-gauge shotgun.
Yeah.
So I started work with a company and then to develop these. And then I got a new job. And within about a year and a half, there were all these companies, mostly U.S.-based, that started producing rubber bullets as a bear deterrent.
Oh, really?
There was no testing with them. There was no evaluation. They just said, well, rubber bullets work.
This'll do the
We'll
trick.
make ours, and they'll be for a 12-gauge, so good to go. And that's what you're using today.
Yeah, sure.
Never went through, like I spent 4 years of doing all this trials and
COs and
evaluation.
Fish and Wildlife all use them,
Yeah.
right? What about, how do they compare to the what they call the beanbag loads?
Oh, yeah, and those all came out like bean bags, Cartaball, Cartabuck. There's all sorts of different products. And I started testing this recent work that were made in China, and they're bean bags, but I realized that as I was testing them, I ripped open the little bag inside, I ripped them open, and they're iron filings.
Oh, my goodness.
So, you take a magnet and they're all sticking to a magnet. But then you think, so we're going to have like iron filings all over the landscape? Or what happens if an animal is wounded and you get iron filings in a wound? Like
Sure.
So the product, is
It's a little iffy.
and even the velocity between different products, for example, you get an order of, like, people are using paintballs, chalk balls, right?
Right, yeah.
You might have used those.
Yeah.
And one batch of chalk balls might be different than another depending who's making them and what their specs are. So, you say, well, I'm used to shooting at this distance, and, you really have to check it out. So, and the velocities are quite different between loads. So anyway, it's a very highly technical stuff. But what I find interesting is that no one did any of the tests with all the products that are currently being used today. So the recent tests I did, where I did cold weather, so I froze them. I put them in dry ice and froze the shells.
Yeah.
And then you saw penetration issues. I used gelatin blocks. And looked at penetration issues with when these things freeze, and it's serious.
They go deep. Well, I know they can kill people. The bears are obviously very tough, but some of them must get pretty wounded.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
how many bears are we talking about in Churchill? Sorry, before you move on, Scott. I'm just curious about, like,
the testing was over 400 bears.
Yeah, and they're all just like cruising around that area?
over 4 years. So they would come in and they would, they were basically waiting for the ice to form, so they're just kind of lying around,
chilling out
till they can get back in the ice and hunts. But in the meantime, these bears haven't had real, food since about July.
Yeah.
And so when you bring out their favorite food, ring seals, like this is, and I thought, if I can keep them away from ring seal, and I could, but they, bears are smart. They learn very quickly.
Yeah.
And so they taught the young biologist a lot of stuff.
I bet.
And they were forgiving of my ineptitude sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just curious about more deterrents. Like we use bear spray, obviously. Some people use air horns, which I found to be fairly ineffective personally. I've used bangers and screamers, and I do have a bear guard that goes around my tent if I'm in dangerous territory. Electric fences, of course. So, I mean, there's so much we could ask you here tonight, but can you speak to some of that? What works, what doesn't? What are maybe some myths that people don't know before they go out and buy this stuff? I mean, bear bells, as far as I'm concerned, keep them in your garbage can. Like they're just really not worth their weight.
Put them on your dog so you can find your dog if it runs away.
But that's about it.
But I would say, you know, what I tell everyone is that bear spray works. But what you have to do is you have to practice with it. You have to know what it does, and you can't keep it inside your pack. It has to be accessible and easy to get to. Yeah. And, you know, I watch all the YouTube videos where guys say, well, you know, my 44 Magnum is the only thing, you know, it's right. You know, it's kind of sometimes it's more of an Alaskan approach to things, but bear spray works, and it works in even cold conditions. And things about wind that have been shown not to be that big an issue, but you have to know how it works, how effective it is, how long it lasts. Some people think that you spray it and you can spray it for like 3 minutes. Well, you and I know that it's about 30 seconds. I've also seen videos that where a family comes up and they decided they bear spray, you know, so if you're not from this country and you think of bug spray, and so you get your little kids out, and you say, "Well, I don't want them getting." So
way.
Turn them into jalapeno peppers.
So like things that you go really. So I've tested electric fences. Electric fences can work, but big installation, big maintenance issues, and when you're talking the Arctic, you've got grounding issues, and you've got trying to keep a power source going. So not so effective there. Around tents, you know, the portable electric fences can be useful. But yeah, I say bear spray, but you know, people need to understand and get some practice and training, use inert cans to practice with, and
know the limitations. I know the electric fences. I was listening to a fairly experienced hunter who uses them, and he said sometimes they don't work, and that's the crazy thing, right? If you're sleeping in Grizz country or polar bear country, you want to know that thing is working, because you're counting on it to work.
Yes, absolutely.
And as you said, if the grounding is wrong or the battery goes dead, or you know, electricity is finicky out in the back country,
it shorts out. All those things.
And he said sometimes he's grabbed it to test it and there was no zap at all. So he was like, it's sort of a deterrent if it's working, right?
I wouldn't. I mean, putting up an electric fence, I wouldn't sleep well at night just with that up. I would want to know a bunch of other things. I mean, I also think having a dog that is knowledgeable with you in camp, that is chained up or with you in your tent, they can hear and smell things long before you'll wake up. And so that's kind of one of the things.
Early detection. Well, I use this, I think it's called a bear attack alarm, and it's more like a burglar alarm. And so you've got this heavy fishing line that you can put a perimeter. And so if they trigger it, at least goes off. It's like 120 decibels with a flashing light. That may not scare them, but what it'll do is it'll wake me up, so I'm awake now before the bear is collapsing my tent. It gives me those few seconds of reaction time, right? So sometimes I'll set that up, and it just runs on a little 9-volt battery, and it's about the size of a sock. Like it's pretty
I've never heard of
that. I test a bunch of that stuff too, and built some, and I also test the big military infrared detection system. So infrared beams, think of your garage door opener kind of system. And they work. You know, anything crossing over, it sends off an alarm. The alarm and sirens didn't scare the bears at all. They would stop and listen, and of course bears, who are very curious animals, they'd go up and, you know, so each one of these giant devices that I carry out and set up in the Arctic, you know, you see the first bear walk up and start reefing on it.
Really?
You know, there's $5,000 in this bear just reefing in pieces within about 2 minutes.
So
Yeah.
the loud alarm didn't really
No,
deter
and
them at all.
recordings of barking dogs didn't do
Yeah.
anything. Barking sled dogs didn't do
Okay,
anything.
yeah.
So I tested all that kind of stuff.
That's so cool. You have you written a book, man? You need to write a book.
No, I haven't done. So sometimes I
you
think
should.
about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
But yeah,
get these
there's-
stories down
Yeah.
before it's too late. Yeah.
Yeah, for
wow,
sure.
that's cool.
So you move into polar bears, and then I mean, like all the research I was looking up, at least when I Google your name, it's like the Grizzly Whisperer, like you're the grizzly guy. How'd you move into grizzlies then? Like, were you done with polar bears? Like, okay, we got to test out grizzlies now.
Well, I mean, you know how personal life affects kind of where you go.
Yeah.
So had a young family in Yellowknife, and we had to make decisions about what we're going to do. So
Yeah.
we decided to move south, the tropics of Hinton, Alberta.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was working for a forest company, and I learned a lot working with foresters.
Yeah.
And I also realized that, in life, if you aren't extremely happy in your job, you really need to fix that.
Yeah.
So
Make the move.
Absolutely.
that's when there was the discussion of the Cheviot coal mine came up. And in the coal mine hearings, the proponents and the governments were chastised about not having regional. Everybody raised, what effect this is going to have on grizzly bears, and this area is next to a national park, and there's bears, and all the bears will be pushed out, and
Yeah.
and the governments that was the line, and the review panel said, well, if you guys were so concerned about bears, why don't you have any data?
Yeah.
You haven't done anything.
Yeah.
So they were chastised. So a bunch of people got together, including forest companies and mining companies and governments, and said, okay, we're going to start a regional bear project. And here's one that you should never do. Never go home, you've got a full-time job, pension, benefits, and say, hey, dear, I just quit my job and I took this 1-year position.
Yeah.
With like a salary, not a wage position, so you get
Yeah.
paid by the hour, no benefit, no pension.
Yeah.
And it's 1 year. It's a 1-year term. It's like you come home and said, I just got 3 magic beans.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so but that 1-year job turned into 23 years.
Yeah.
So it kind of took on its own life, and I built a great team and worked with a lot of really good people. And then people said, well, you've done all this work right around Hinton and this area. We want the, all the way down, to the Montana border and up to the NWT border. So our team marched up and down the east slopes of Alberta doing bear research and catching bears and monitoring bears. And, and
You were doing
and
population estimates
so
for the province.
that
too,
was
right?
one of the things.
Yeah,
So
which is tricky stuff.
so when I started, there was still a spring bear hunt, and we were asked to do some inventory. So at first we were, mapping habitat and understanding bear movements and habitat use and foods, and then we were asked to do population inventory, the good old number of bears. And any bear biologist that talks about bear inventory, you wake up screaming in the night because it's not fun. Anyway, so and the DNA work was just starting then, where people had learned that they could collect bear hair and get DNA from that to recognize individuals, run the genetics from that, and you get male and female and black and grizzly. And so we were asked to do that. So I worked with some guys in BC that had done the first work, and we did a design, and we sampled BMA3, which is the area between Highway 16 south to Highway 11. So that's BMA3.
Okay. Yeah.
And
David Thompson corridor.
yeah. And so we did the first work, and we said, okay, you've got 45 bears. And then, management people sometimes say, oh, those science guys, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like they've messed up and they don't know. And people didn't believe it. Mm-hmm. So they were still, with that number, they were still hunting and giving out tags. And the next year, and I won't go into all the, the gory details, but a fair number of bears were killed the next year.
Yeah.
And a lot of those bears were adult females.
Oh, no.
And basically with a population of 45, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
So the year after that, we were asked to go down and do the same inventory in BMA 5, which is the Highway 11 down to Highway 1. That's BMA 4, sorry. And we came up with, again, a small number. I can't remember exactly, but it was 50 some animals. And at that point, the government said, we have an issue.
Yeah.
And then they said, we're now going to look at suspending the hunt while we investigate. And then more information came in. It was certainly the numbers were much lower than anyone thought. But if you go back, and history is always important, and it's, the first estimates for the number of bears in Alberta was a bunch of biologists sitting around, probably in a situation like this, with some maps and colored pencils, no GIS back then. And people would say, well, how many bears do you think are in your area?
Yeah.
And someone would say, well, probably about 100.
Yeah.
And they said, well, but there's lots of industrial activity. And they said, yeah, well, we better scale that back to 80.
Yeah.
And it's the dartboard behind you.
Just a guesstimate.
That's kind of how it was. But so they wrote this up. And I mean, they did a pretty good job overall, given what they had to work with, their experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
But when they wrote this up in the 1990, I want to say, in the report it said, the big thing, it says disclaimer kind of thing, said, this is our best estimate, but we really need to go out and do the research and inventory to confirm these numbers.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, that never happened.
Sure.
So what then happened is people put in these numbers, the base numbers, into a model, population model. And I called the model To Infinity and Beyond, because there was never any chance for it to decline.
It just keeps going.
It just kept, so, and then, people giving out, hunting tags would say, oh, we still got lots of bears because the model says there's lots of bears.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when we started actually doing science-based inventory, said, oops.
Yeah.
That's when things kind of changed.
Was there quite a pushback from that, like from hunters and?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I was viewed, and people still stop me sometimes and say, "Oh, you're the guy that stopped the bear hunt."
Yeah.
And I go, No. I collected the science.
Yeah.
Other people made decisions. But at the same time, when we were starting our work, we found that poaching was a real issue. So the illegal kill of bears.
Yeah.
And and you never really know about the number of bears killed until you start putting collars on.
Yeah.
So when you put on collared bears and you find them shot, dead, thrown in the river, all that kind of stuff, that's when you go, wow, there's a bigger problem. And of course, what happened when I raised that issue, some people thought I was being critical of the people whose job it was to stop poaching, like enforcement staff.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intent at all. It was just, now we have data to show that this is a serious management issue. And that's when things started changing. And I'll tell one other story because it's kind of an insight into, you got to be pretty hard ass sometimes when you're a bear biologist. So there was a situation where one of our local bears was shot, and it was a local bear that people had named Mary because it was down by a place called Mary Greig Lake.
Yeah, she was famous. People would go see her all the time.
People in Hinton, they'd have visitors come to, friends and relatives come and, we got to go see some bears. So we'd drive down, and there's Mary's side of the road. Well, and she was collared, and she had cubs with her, and we found out she had been shot, and her carcass, thrown in the river, kind of thing, and so it hit the local media, our local town paper, and it got picked up by CBC, and I got a call and said, we from CBC Edmonton, we're wondering if we could come out and talk to you about this story about this bear. I said, yeah, okay, it's science and the results. So we drive down Highway 4, and I do a little stand up side of the road and saying this is kind of where it happened and all this. And the mistake I made lots of mistakes, but one of the mistakes I made was I'm standing in my uniform, my government uniform, because when I'm out doing the work, I have to have a handgun on, and I'm following various rules, but you shouldn't do that, right? You got to get permission, and there's all these things. But I didn't do that. But anyway, so I thought, okay, it's going to be on CBC. Well, that night, it's on, Peter Mansbridge, the National News.
National News, CBC, yeah.
And of course, it's across the country.
Yeah.
And so the next day, you can imagine.
Yeah.
It's the Come to Jesus meeting. And they said, okay, you're done, you're fired. And I said, well, I'm not quitting.
Yeah.
So I guess you'll have to fire me. And then what ended up happening, all my partners, people put money and said, hold it. He was just giving out the research results, and
Yeah.
that's research. But anyway, so all that personal stuff, it took its toll a bit,
Yeah.
but-
You probably got into bear research thinking it's bear research, not realizing how politically of a hot potato that was going to be,
Totally.
right? Yeah.
But the most important thing I learned was that, I can do all the science and fancy graphs and reports and publish lots and lots of papers. But what happened with that outcry, so within a month, the fine for poaching a grizzly bear in Alberta went from $5,000 before my little trip up to $100,000.
Yeah.
So that was the political change that happened within a month because of the media attention.
Sure.
And that people took exception. And other interesting, so I had a native artist from Manitoba. He saw the story, and he writes this letter, and on the envelope it says, Gord, the biologist on Bears, Alberta. That's what the envelope said. I still have the envelope.
Yeah.
And it got to Jasper. Jasper sent it to Hinton, and it got to me, right?
Wow.
And in it, he said, I'm just sort of disgusted and upset by this. I'm an artist. I'd like to do something. Can I paint a picture and you can auction or sell it or something?
Yeah.
And he did it. And
Wow.
I mean, it was a pretty, from a really bad situation. And then I also thought that the people in Hinton were outraged that someone had killed their local bear.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I still hear about that story.
Yeah.
People really loved Mary, the grizzly bear,
Sure.
and she was a bit of an icon.
And that bear was tolerant, people were, I think people most of all were respectful. They watched, took pictures, and they didn't press her. And to my knowledge, and then someone decided that bear should be shot. I don't- Anyway, that's the long story, but you understand the local interest, the politics, and the media.
Yeah. It can get real complicated real quick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your candor about that. Maybe we'll segue back into the science and the fun stories. And I had a question about polar bears and bluff charges, because we've experienced grizz and black bears will commonly bluff charge. And polar bears, I mean, they're predators, meat predators, right? So do they bluff charge?
Yes.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so not every charge is I'm going to eat you.
No, but the old story about, so how can you tell the difference between a bluff charge and a real charge is when you're lying on the ground? Right. That's the real thing.
You're part of the scat, right? Yeah. Yeah, so how would you know? I mean, polar bears just freak me out that much more because they are predators 100%, right? Would you agree that they're more dangerous as a critter than a grizzly?
Well, it's interesting, from having worked on both species, I always feel more comfortable working on polar bears because you can see what's around you.
Okay. Open country.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, there's some safety and visibility.
Right.
But with a grizzly bear, so you're working on a bear and, it's the mating season, right? Mm-hmm. And suddenly out of the bush, 50 yards away comes some male bear who, you've got his dance partner down putting on a collar.
Yeah.
And you had no idea that bear was there. Like you couldn't see it. It just, so I always feel better working on polar bears just because of the sight lines around.
Yeah.
In terms of danger and safety, I wouldn't say there's much difference.
Okay.
But they all can run extremely fast, and
Yeah, I think they've been clocked at 40 feet a second when you do it from miles per hour into feet per second. So again, with your bear spray, if it's in your pack, you may as well just leave it at home. It needs to be quick, accessible. Yeah, absolutely.
In your research, are you seeing, are polar bears a little more social with each other? Like, we always hear, grizzly bears, there's one grizzly bear in a 50-mile radius or whatever it is. Do you find polar bears kind of hanging out together? Or?
So what I would say, can I tell one more story, like a grizzly bear story?
Tell lots of stories.
So I don't think we know enough or appreciate the social life of bears. So, going to school way back when, I went to university just after the Franklin expedition. And, we were taught, grizzly bears are a solitary species. They come together during mating period, and then, the females raise the cub and they try to stay away from males. That's what we're taught, right?
Yeah.
And then enter the world of GPS collars and genetics. So 1 year south of Hinton, we had 3 adult female grizzly bears collared. So all GPS collars, so you can see where they are and what they're doing. And 2 of them are sisters, and 1 is an offspring of one of the females. So you've got 3 related females. They all have cubs of the year, little guys, right? The little, small guys. They all meet on a mountain in July, the same mountain, all together.
Wow.
So think of in humans, we'd call it the summer family reunion.
Yeah,
we all go
family
we meet
reunion,
up at the lake and we have a few beers. But in this case, they all meet on this side of the mountain. They spent 2 weeks together traveling around as a group.
Cool.
And then I asked myself, when they left, did the right cubs go with the right mothers?
Wow.
I don't know. But
That's amazing, yeah.
we would have never known that without the collars and genetics. Before we'd say, oh, look, there's some bears in a group. They're probably feeding on a carcass. That's probably what you'd conclude. But so I think there's still a lot to learn about the social dynamics of bears.
Yeah, because, maybe you'd know the answer to this. I was out last spring, and I saw a big sow grizzly with 2 cubs and watching her from the roadside. And this was, up north here, north of Hinton in the bush. We were black bear hunting at the time, and watching her and thought, oh, this is sweet, and she was feeding on a moose carcass there. And suddenly this other bear pops out of the bush that's a little bit smaller than her, but bigger than the cubs. And I'm like, this doesn't add up. Like, she's not chasing it off. They're tolerant. And I'm like, could this be last year's cub that got booted out? And
Absolutely. Probably a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Still hanging around with mom.
Still hanging around, sort of. Yeah. That's amazing. So you got sort of this multi-generational relationship going on.
And I just think there's lots we don't understand. Even, black bears and grizzly bears, I've flown over in a helicopter, big berry patch down in Waterton.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can't, wait a minute, there's a berry patch. There's 3 grizzlies and 4 black bears in the same, the size of like inside this garage, right?
Yeah.
And they're all no one's bothering the other bear. They're all focused on the berries and food. And
wow.
You'd go back to a biology books and they're going to chase one another off and the grizzlies will be dominant, and no one cared. They're all about food. They're just
That's amazing.
Anyway, I think there's lots we still don't understand and a lot still to learn.
What's the process for collaring a bear then?
So capture can take many forms, and during the course of our research program, we moved away, and it's still used in some places. We moved away from snaring bears, leg hold snares. I don't do that anymore. We use culvert traps, and then most of the bears that we worked on were caught with aerial darting in a helicopter. So,
oh wow, okay,
you fly in a helicopter and you find a bear out in the open,
Yeah.
And there's lots and lots of decisions and lots of things that can go wrong. And you want to make sure you've got a great pilot. You come home at the end of the day, and then you try to get a dart in the bear, and you want the bear to go to sleep. It takes, between 5 to 7 minutes for a bear to go down.
Yeah.
So you have to keep it out of water. So bears, when they overheat, when they're running, they'll go to water or even snow to cool off on. And of course they can drown or, put their nose right into snow and suffocate. So there's lots and lots of things that you have to watch for. So you get the bear down, immobilized, then you go up very carefully to make sure it's asleep.
Yeah, it's not faking
right?
it.
So, because all these dart systems, they, you assume that they get all the drug.
Right.
But sometimes darts misfire and they get maybe half the drug.
Yeah.
So you walk up there and we have what's called a jab stick, a long pole, and you poke the bear and you kind of check it out and you evaluate, and then you go up very carefully to confirm that it's okay.
Yeah.
And then you start work.
You've got, if I'm not mistaken, you've got a pretty fun polar bear darting story. Helicopter and it jumped in the water. Is this right? Is this something I dreamt?
No,
tell us that story.
It's a long road. It's a young biologist story, young green biologist, not so green really at that time, but our job was to work in a place called Fox Basin, and it was a mark recapture study. So the goal is to put ear tag, little white markers in the bear's ears, and then because there's hunting that goes on, they look at what the hunters get versus how many tags are out to estimate population size. So we had to do all the coasts in Fox Basin, but we also had to do the islands, offshore islands, and there's an island called Coates Island, kind of in the middle of Hudson Bay, not in the middle, northern part of Hudson Bay. And we fly over there in a little Jet Ranger Bell 206, and I'm in the back seat with a inflatable life raft in case we go down, because, and you probably couldn't do that now. Like, there's probably all sorts of rules that we were breaking. But back then, that's what you did.
Yeah.
So you get to this island, and it's basically a gravel island. And I thought, okay, well, here we go. So we fly the outside of the island because, we think the bears are going to be along the coast. Didn't see any, and I think, well, we should do a flight, down the middle of the island, and it's like flying, on a gravel pit. And the pilot says, oh, here's a bear up here. And I thought, oh, this is great. Like, it's a white bear, gravel, easy. We'll just dart him, get on there. So I'm in the back, and I can't see because there's all this in front. You can't see what's happening in front of you. And we come up, and I'm loading a dart, and the pilot says, oh, there's a lake. And I said, wait a minute, there's no lake on my map, So I said, okay, quick, we'll get a dart in and we'll turn him so he doesn't go in the water. So, put a dart in, and you quickly realize that bear is not turning. So, and I said, go down in front of the bear, and you could have opened the back doors of the helicopter. He would have run right through because he wasn't stopping. So he goes in the lake.
Oof.
And now he starts kind of bobbing and weaving because the drug's taking effect.
Yeah.
And it was a drug that we don't use anymore, or combinations we don't use anymore. So we get down, and I'm in the back, and I've got a lasso. I've got the door open, and I'm trying to lower the lasso over his head so I can pull it out so the bear doesn't drown.
Yeah.
And the prop wash from the helicopter is blowing the lasso. And I said, and never do this, the things you shouldn't do. I'm telling you all the things you shouldn't do.
Right, yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm going in. I take off my headset, and I jump. And any pilot that I know would say, never do that. Never do that. And so I didn't really give the pilot much warning, so that he does a little shaking. But I land on top of the bear.
Wow.
Not planned. So I slide off, and the bear's kind of doing his thing, and he's not quite drugged yet.
Yeah.
But he's going under.
Oh, boy.
And I'm up to kind of my chin, and I've got, the big army parka and white boots and your gun on the outside. And the helicopter's landed over on the shore. My buddy's there, and I'm, polar bears float, right? So they're in the water and they float, but they only float till they hit bottom. It's kind of like pulling a boat up on a beach.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we've got to get this bear's head out of the water so it doesn't drown. So we pull it up as best we can. So he's out of the water, and, you're soaking wet, freezing cold, and the bear stops breathing.
Oh, boy.
And so I start doing artificial respiration on a bear,
Yeah.
So basically you're doing chest compressions.
Yeah.
And the bear, every maybe 2 or 3 minutes, would do a deep breath, would go, and I'd go, okay, come on, more. And he would stop again, and I keep doing this. So it's about, I'm doing this for about maybe 45 minutes to an hour.
Jeez.
Wow.
And the bear's now breathing on his own, but
Yeah.
my hands are frozen. They're like blocks of ice. And I get the data sheet out, and I punch 2 holes in the ears to put in the tags, and the bear stands up.
Oh, boy.
What?
And I fall over backwards into the lake,
Yeah.
Goodness.
pull out my gun because I thought, okay, this is it. And
Yeah.
of course, my gun's just a block of ice. It's
All
useless.
frozen.
Yeah.
And the bear kind of looks at me, walks by out and past the helicopter, and the pilot is sitting in the helicopter having a smoke.
Yeah.
Right? And he watches this bear walk in front of him, and I still have the data sheet that has the times and no other data, right?
Yeah.
It was just, all panic. And we get back to the helicopter, and the pilot says, is that the way it's supposed to go? Yeah. So that's the
And
story.
you're like, yeah, I always jump out of the helicopter.
And, so I thought, what a tolerant, anyway, but just, it was one of those days, everything that could go wrong did. And I learned my lesson, and certainly when a bear wants to go to the water, polar bear, it will go.
Yeah,
It's
So
going, yeah.
no matter
yeah.
what the helicopter pilot you tell it to do, you know. So
So you must have been close to severe hypothermia at that point.
I couldn't open the door to the helicopter.
Man.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
The pilot had to put out a cigarette to open the door for me. But
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I love that. Wow.
We have a podcast question of the week that I put out this week.
sure.
And it was, if you could dedicate your life to studying any animal, which animal would you choose? Tara wrote in saying grizzly bear, so she'll be excited to hear this episode. Renee said porcupine, be an interesting one. Christina said beavers. Scott, what was yours? You said
It was a
Wolverine?
toss-up between Wolverine and Grizzly. I mean, Grizzly, monarch of the North, it's just obvious. But Wolverines are just so cool, and I think there's a lot we still understand about those critters, you know?
My mom wrote in, she said bear. She would like to study bears. And Trevor wrote in saying migrated birds so that he could travel around the world and chase them down. So
Oh, yeah.
bears, your specialty then? Like everything I've been looking up is bears. Is that like
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
you were
it's-
Canada Goose at the very beginning?
Yeah,
and then-
I mean, you know, if you want a shopping list of, you know, so Arctic nesting geese, barren ground caribou, muskox, Dall sheep, moose.
Yeah.
You know, so I've worked on a number of
there's
different
quite a few,
species,
yeah.
but working on bears has always been, you know, that was, you know, the story of quitting my job, taking a 1-year position because it was working on bears, and I always liked doing it. So I thought that makes me happy. So there you go.
I am
fantastic.
curious about like as we get into how many bears you guys have collared and tagged. Like, do you have a number for how many grizzlies have tags on them in Alberta, or how many you guys?
Oh, we handled during the course of the project over 300 bears,
Okay.
like 320 or something.
Yeah.
But then, you know, so that's capture, handled, collared, well, physically touched and took samples from. And then there's, of course, all the genetic DNA stuff, which is samples from many other bears. So, yeah.
Have you seen a population like, so when you started was 98, right around there? You would have had 45 bears and
Yeah, so the first inventory in this area just south of Hinton was 2004.
2004. Okay.
And we repeated it 10 years later, and the population had more than doubled in 10 years.
Nice. Okay.
So
yeah.
what had happened then is a bunch of things. We stopped hunting.
Yeah.
So when you think of like hunting, you know, and you can have pro or con about hunting, but it's one lever. If you're trying to manage a population, if there's, you know, trying to control poaching, very difficult.
Yeah.
It can be done, but it's hard.
Yeah.
To stop a hunt, it's a lever that you can pull. Might not be popular, but it did give the population a chance to recover.
Yeah.
And so the numbers doubled in 10 years, which is impressive. And then other things that started happening is more awareness with the public about the issue of poaching. I think it became more of something more frowned upon than ever before. And also that in the course of our research, we did another thing that was probably viewed as somewhat unpopular. We came up with road density thresholds.
I was going to say,
So
yeah, roads is a big
we
one, eh?
identified areas where we said you're at a maximum for the number of roads you can put in here. So if you're going to put in new road, and what are roads related to? Roads are related to poaching and access.
Oh yeah. Getting in. Yeah.
So I mean, from the research, if I want to look at what's the achievement, I'd say road density thresholds
Yeah.
in Alberta. And the other thing that kind of made me happy was, as I'm doing work in BC now, guess what? They have road density thresholds. Guess what the numbers are? They match ours.
Oh, okay.
And they looked, you know, with their own data and came up with, anyway, so
Yeah.
it was a pretty major change in land management, and it
Sure.
applies to forest companies and oil and gas companies, anyone that is looking at putting new roads in, and people are looking at that as a result of the work we did on the research program.
Wow. George, I have some would you rathers. Did you have any?
I didn't write any down, but I'm excited to hear yours.
Oh man, I always write too many. So
Good.
a little bit lighthearted here, right? Let's move away from politics. Let's go a little. This appeals to the grade 9 boy in all of us.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Would you rather be stuck in a tent with a stinky wet dog, a gassy colleague who snores like a chainsaw for a week, or camp alone in dangerous polar bear country? So you can share it with the stinky wet dog and the gassy colleague, or you're alone.
Oh, the dog and the colleague are both in there.
They're in the tent, man. He snores, so you're not sleeping well. There's polar bears regardless.
Right.
No, sorry. No.
No.
No, there's polar bears if you're sleeping alone. Yeah.
I'm going polar bears. I don't know if I
Really,
I
eh?
think I could do it. Polar bears like more aggressive. Like if you're in a tent, are they coming up trying to sniff around or?
One more story.
Yeah.
Quick one.
Yeah.
So we're at this camp, Wager Bay, and I'm with and we're sleeping. I built one cabin, prefab cabin, and then the pilot and engineer are sleeping in a wall tent. And it's a 8x10, 8x12 wall tent.
Yeah.
And they've got cots on the side. And polar bear family came in one night, and I look out I'm sleeping in a little dome tent, and I hear this, is that a bear? And I look out, and there's a bear pushing the side of the tent.
Wow.
And of course, it was the engineer, not the pilot. And of course, the engineer is terrified. He rolls onto the ground off his cot, and he lies there holding his gun. And bear went out. But, yeah.
The bear left?
Well, I had a dog with me who chased the bears away. But
Yeah.
I'll go with the stinky dog if it's me.
Yeah. Okay.
What are you doing, Scott?
Well, if Gord's going stinky dog, I'm going
You're doing
stinky
the
dog.
same
Yeah. No, polar bears at night. I've had a black bear come at me twice on a solo trip at night.
Yeah.
And I was in my underwear on a hot night, stepping out in my bare feet, yelling at this bear, and that I just felt like a piece of steak in the dark. Like you suddenly feel, you go from the top of the food chain, and I've shot my share of black bears, but man, when the tables are turned, you think, I feel like a piece of meat.
Yeah.
Have you had one follow you through the bush?
Not that I know.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us the story.
Well, I mean, it's like, you're out, hiking or hunting, whatever you're doing, and having a black bear that is following you.
Yeah.
And you turn around and you yell and throw rocks, whatever you're going to do. And then it just keeps following you, and you think, when is it going to make the charge?
Yeah.
Right.
And you keep an eye on it, but you got to walk and you got to.
Oh
anyway,
you're always looking over your shoulder.
Yeah. And the predatory black bears, people forget about those sneaky little black bears.
Was there black bear research you were doing too, like along with grizzly? Or
No, I mean, we caught a lot of black. It's kind of like the byproduct of the
Yeah.
catch. You'd catch black bears too.
Yeah. So then you tagging them, or you just say, no, we'll
No,
let this guy
catch
go?
and release, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I got one more. Put on the reading glasses here. Look at this. Would you rather fall into an icy river with soaked gear? Sounds like your story already. But you're 10 miles from camp. So you're freezing. You got 10 miles
It's
to
a
go.
long hike.
You got hypothermia. Or accidentally startle a grizzly bear on a dead moose at close range. Those are your choices.
Man.
You're battling the cold or the potential grizz.
10 miles soaked is...
That's deadly, man.
Yeah, that's not good. I'll approach a grizzly bear.
Yeah. I didn't tell you what you have. Maybe you got nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you've got no bear spray, it could be hooped. How about you, Gord?
I would go with startling the bear,
Yeah. Okay.
because when bears can be, they'll give you warning. They're going to tell you to stay away from their food.
Yeah.
I think you have a better chance there than the 10 miles
10
soaking
miles
wet.
frozen. Yeah.
I'm curious. This was one question that I didn't even write this down, but this was like something that I've been thinking about for a while. I've never come across a spot that seems like a bear den, that was sleeping in the winter. Where are these grizzlies, where are they hiding at all winter?
Well, you also know that like black bears are true hibernators, right?
Yeah.
So you can, biologists know where a black bear den is. You can get a shovel, you can pull them out, change the collar, put them back in. They kind of don't wake up.
They're not even waking up.
Grizzly bears, you can't do that. They'll wake up.
Yeah.
And people that, ski over them with cross-country skis can have them wake up. But they're, in Alberta, we haven't found any places where they're reusing like kind of rock caves. They excavate dens every year.
Okay.
And if you find a den, they'll usually return, but they might be like 100 yards down a drainage and excavate there.
So are you going in the wintertime to track these at all? Like
Negative.
No, nothing like that.
But we know where the dens are.
Yeah,
And
just
with the
based on the
technology
collar.
now, you can put on what's called an e-fence around your the den.
Okay.
So you can be at home, like I'll be home watching a hockey game in the spring.
Yeah.
And you'll get a notification on my phone saying
wow.
Bear 85 has just left the den.
Yeah.
You know, because
that's cool.
yeah, it's totally. I mean, yeah, that's all kind of new technology stuff. But yeah,
You got a favorite bear that you've dealt with over the years?
yeah. There's a bear that and it's one of those stories where the veterinarian that was working with us, he was always out here on his birthday, working with us, and we'd flying into Jasper Park,
Yeah.
and every year on his birthday we'd go through Rocky Pass. It's the name of this pass.
Yeah.
And the same bear would be there every year on that day.
Yeah.
I'd say, oh, let's go back, get your bear.
Yeah.
And we'd go, and there it was again, and it's this big male bear, and he was not a happy fellow being caught. And then when we did the genetics, all this genetic work, we found that guy who was, I think we found him, and he was 32 years old.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
And the number of offspring he had, he'd been a busy boy.
Yeah.
So, but like, you know, a big bear.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was,
32.
Yeah.
Holy cow. What is the oldest bear you guys have?
that's the oldest one.
Yeah, 32? Yeah.
32.
Yeah,
Man,
that's old.
wild.
And yet we've got females now that are like 24, 25, still producing cubs.
Yeah.
You know,
Amazing.
and you know,
Yeah.
you think of grizzly bears as, you know, these giant animals. Well, you know, you can get like a 230-pound little female bear still pumping out cubs, and she's
Yeah.
you know 23 years old, and it's quite amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. Man, I could chat with you all evening here. I got one more question for sure I wanted to chat with you about, was the international grizzly bear stuff you're working on or have worked on. And a lot of folks don't know that the brown bear of Europe is, you know, essentially a grizzly. And there are even populations in Italy, Scandinavia, Russia, some of what I call the East Bloc countries. But tell us a bit about that work, because you've been on an international scale there working with those folks.
Yeah, I did a number of years going over to the Scandinavian brown bear project that takes place in Sweden. And they're doing similar things. They've got different questions. They've, you know, their population back in 1930 was below 100 animals, and now they have many thousands of animals.
Is
so
that right?
It
Wow.
shows that bears can recover.
So what was their secret? How did
Well,
they turn
I
that
mean,
around?
they do forestry differently. So
Okay.
they do a lot of selective thinning,
Selective logging, yeah.
and which is berry crops are through the roof, and they have huge moose populations.
Okay.
And so bears do well, very productive habitat. And one of the things I was there, so, you know, I'm out catching my first bear with helicopter darting. It's kind of, you know, it's a different continent, but same kind of process. And we land, but, you know, in North America, we'd have firearms. And I look around and no one has a firearm. No one has bear spray. And I said, well, how are you going to see whether the bear's like really down and safe to approach?
Yeah.
I said, we throw snowballs. And I thought, first of all, okay, someone's filming this for the Canadian guy, right?
Yeah.
The Team Canada thing. And I see them there. No, they were throwing. So there I'm throwing snowballs at this big male bear, you know, seeing who could hit him and if he responds when he got hit. So
my
I did that. And you guys, Matt Sundin, you know,
Yeah. Maple
so
Leafs.
I spent a day catching bears with Matt Sundin
Oh, wow.
in Sweden.
Huh.
And he's
Cool.
his grandparents lived up in the area we were working, and he was interested in the work, and he came out and supporting the research. And I spent a day with him and catching bears, and it was pretty cool. And all he wants to talk about is bears. All I want to talk about, who's the best goalie you've ever played against?
Yeah.
Like that was. And then I'm working with him, and, you know, we wear rubber gloves and stuff, and he's working beside me, and I said, oh, here's a glove. And then I looked at his hand, which is the size of a dinner plate, and I look at my hand, I said, okay, these aren't going to work. But really a nice guy. And
Well, you said you're rubbing shoulders there with the country star as well. You never thought that bear research would get you rubbing shoulders with celebrities. So Corb Lund called you up. Tell us the story there.
Yeah, Corb Lund, and it was a day when one of the guys I worked with said, oh, we should have a theme song for the project. And he says, Gord just did a song called Grizzly Bear Blues. And I said, oh, yeah. I kind of smiled, shook my head. And I'm out walking my dog in a field, and my phone rings, and it comes up and it says Gord and I thought, oh yeah, the guys in the office, they figured this out.
Yeah.
But it was Gord, and he said, oh hi, I was told that I should talk to you. He says, I've written a song and it's out. He said, but I probably should have talked to you first. I wanted to know what I got wrong when I wrote the lyrics to this song. And so he said, well, do a podcast with him on his YouTube channel. So I did that, and yeah, he's a nice guy, and we laughed and talked about bears, and he got a lot of stuff right. But
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, right on.
I can listen to
That's
that song
great.
now. What's the, like, it's kind of like a broad question, but I'm just curious, like over your decades of research, what's surprising that you learned about like the grizzly population in Alberta? Anything that stands out where you're like, oh, this is unexpected?
Well, I think bears always taught me stuff, and they taught me how forgiving they are, how smart they are. Give you one example. There's a bear in southern part of Jasper Park, the second bear we ever caught in the project, bear G2. And it was time to change its collar. The collars only last about 2 years. And we would fly down there. It's a long flight in a helicopter, and it burns a lot of money. So, you don't want to do that flight too often. So we'd gone down there, and every time that bear would hear the helicopter coming, this bear would run and hide under the trees. You couldn't dart it, right?
Yeah.
It was smart. It knew what's up.
Yeah.
Only after being caught once. So after about the third time doing this, I was finally said, okay. And we're going down, you're listening to telemetry, and it's beeping, and you say, okay, it's down, it's out of Jasper, but it's in this big basin, and it's all snow. And I thought, oh, perfect. Even I should be able to hit a brown bear in a white bowl, right?
Yeah.
It's in here somewhere. And we fly around, and my pilot says, wait a minute, what's that up there? And up on this ledge at 9,200 feet is this bear. And we fly up, and it's lying down. It's lying down, not looking at the helicopter on this ledge, snow ledge.
Yeah.
It's lying down, not looking, and the prop wash is blowing its fur, and it won't look at us.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, of course, I'm a biologist. I know what the hell I'm doing. So I thought, I'm going to put a dart into it, and when I dart it, it's going to leave, and it's going to come down into the bowl, and I'll work on it there.
Yeah.
So I shoot it, dart it, and the bear puts his paw up over his head and continues to lay there, doesn't move.
Huh.
And now I thought, uh-oh,
Yeah.
it's asleep. I'm committed.
Yeah.
So I have to hike up
Oh, no.
with all the gear to this ledge and put on a collar. I was working with a wildlife officer at the time who were halfway up, and he says, I hate heights. I said, oh, it's okay, we're good. And we're on this snow ledge. He says, what's underneath us? Oh, it's good. It's rock.
Yeah. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Don't move a lot. Let's just.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the bear quickly had figured out what we're doing and how to avoid us.
Yeah.
And then when it couldn't hide under a tree, its approach was it was going to be like a rock. It was just going to lie on that ledge
Yeah.
and hope that we'd never see it.
Smart critter.
Oh,
eh?
totally
Yeah.
smart. Yeah. And I also learned that engaging people in your research is really important. We had ranchers that we were working with, and when we caught a bear on their property, we got them out and their family and their grandchildren. They put on rubber gloves. We let them take rectal temperatures and tighten a bolt on a collar.
Yeah.
And the guy said to me, well, he's got 500 new calves in a field, and a bear had been in killing. And he says, well, where are you taking this bear? I said, no, we're not taking him anywhere. We're letting him go right here. And you hold your breath, because that bear got out, ran through all these calves. He just wanted to get away.
Yeah.
And then every month I would send that rancher a map of where his bear was. And he'd go to the coffee shops, every Saturday morning with the boys with his map and say, hey, Frank, this went by your place. And he said, no, I'll get out. I didn't. And the bear didn't bother other people. The bear was around. They're sharing the landscape.
Wow.
I think it changed how these guys viewed bears.
Sure.
They thought a bear shows up and we better shoot it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just, science can help educate and inform, but getting those guys on side was perhaps more important than putting a collar on that bear.
Yeah. Gord, you've got to write a book. I'm just sitting here. It's going to be an international bestseller. No, I swear it will. You definitely have to. That's got to be your next retirement project because so many great stories. Like, that's fantastic.
Your retirement keeps getting busier and busier.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
What's the future of grizzlies in Alberta then? Is like hunting going to be...
Technically there are populations that could stand a limited entry hunt if it was well managed. One of the big things I think that overall that we're lacking is that we've kind of stopped monitoring. So, when I started the project, there was no data.
Yeah.
And when I was working for a forest company and I'd go meet with government people and they say, well, you're going to harvest in bear habitat, don't kill any. That was the level of kind of knowledge and data and planning. And we got some good population estimates and we knew what's going on, but now things have kind of got dormant. And if many more years go by and we don't know, we'll be back to where we started. So if you really want to utilize a population, any wildlife population, you have to monitor. You have to understand what's going on, and you have to know your numbers and what's possible for harvestable surplus.
Someone coming in to fill your shoes then? Or what's happening?
No, I mean, when my secondment ended, and by the way, no one's seconded for 23 years.
That's a long secondment. Holy moly.
A lady from HR thought it was a typo when she called me. She said, I think it should be 3. What's this? So there's work going on at FRI Research, a project that I've passed on to a fellow Dario who's leading it up.
Yeah.
And they're doing some monitoring, looking at different techniques. But provincially, there hasn't been engagement. And a lot of people think, oh, good, we've had 2 populations that have doubled. We've got scientific data. And then everyone thinks, well, all the populations have doubled. We don't know that.
Right.
So if you're serious about management and the species and maybe want to get it off the threatened population list, you're going to have to keep doing the work. Mm-hmm. And bear work is expensive and it's hard and it's time consuming. And I also think it takes a special skill set that is not, it's not taught in school. You have to be a field person doing it, and you have to work with like experienced veterinarians and technicians, and it's tough work, but we had a lot of fun. We had a good crew, we had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and we worked hard, but we think we changed the course of grizzly bear management in this province.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some more things done, but
It sounds amazing. I mean, like half the time it sounds like you're out in a plane or a helicopter flying through the mountains, and jealous.
Yeah, life of adventure. You've had a rich life. Who would have thought, starting with the Canada geese, eh?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have 1,000 questions also, but Gord, we'll have to have you back in.
We're gonna have to have you back. We
Yeah.
scratched the surface. No, this is great.
I love it. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and
It's been
chatting
fun.
with us. This
It's
is
been
great.
fun.
Scott, Northern Rockies Bushcraft on Instagram. Follow along with Scott's adventures. You've been out doing some hunting and
Yeah, we got a black bear on the weekend.
Yeah.
And again, I know Steve Vernella from Meat Eater says you can post a fish online. Everyone claps.
yeah.
You can post a deer. You've lost a few people. You post a bear.
Yeah.
You lose like 3/4. So there's the black bear population's quite healthy. We eat the meat, use the fur.
Yeah.
So nothing goes to waste. And it was a very exciting hunt. Even though a black bear is not a grizz, when you're following up a trail with a black bear, it gets your heart pounding. Let me tell you.
Follow along with Scott there, Northern Rockies Bushcraft on Instagram. We'll have links to that. And then, if you want to leave us a review, that would be fantastic. Wherever you're listening, Spotify or Apple or iTunes or wherever your favorite podcast can be found. And send in a message if you want to get a hold of us at wildernesswave@outlook.com. Gord, I love your stories.
Thanks a lot. And by the way, just a bear biologist is allowed to tell, usually when they get together in a group, one bear story and one flying story. So I'm done.
That's great. No, you can see, George, why we needed to get this guy in. Yeah, we'll have to get you back.
Yeah.
Gord.
No, that's great. I
that
love the
was
insight,
fantastic.
and I mean, like we talked about here, you changed the look of grizzly research in Alberta, and I mean, from what I was reading online, it sounds like a lot of things in the world too. Like you've changed how people are looking at it, which is a big thing because we mentioned, it's just you can throw out a number. Hey, my cousin saw a grizzly bear out there, so there's got to be lots out there. But until you actually have this data, you don't know. So, yeah, perfect. Okay, till next week. Stay well.
Thanks a lot.
Wilderness Wavelength.